Dr. Karen Lord, keynote speaker, Dr. Deborah Providence, and I saw Dr. Nicola Hunt, members of the organizing committee, colleagues, Dr. Constant, I'm seeing you there, delegates for the symposium, students, anyone else who's here as a guest, and part of the audience, a very warm welcome. I have a few tossed off remarks. Please indulge me. When I tell people I'm concerned about my son's relationship with trolls, some of them look both aghast and perplexed. How could I let a 4-year-old surf the web? And in any case, how does he read the abuse? Of course, what I'm referring to is his refusal to dismiss the troll in The Billy Goat's Gruff as merely a predatory trope, an incarnation of the fears and threats facing the protagonists, the gruff family of goats. This refusal is based on a small illustration in the version we read, in which the troll's dwelling place under the bridge includes a washing line with troll underwear hanging from it, as well as a few kitchen receptacles. His curiosity is naturally piqued by these domestic details. How does the troll cook? Does he have a stove down there? Do other trolls come and visit him under the bridge? Where do they live? It is these glances towards an actual parallel universe in all its infinite detail that fascinate me when I consume speculative narratives in audiovisual form, and as I just said, I have to admit that's my primary mode of exposure to this genre. I can't help thinking that it is this uniquely human capacity to speculate in this way that makes speculative fiction, particularly, along with poetry perhaps, the most radical of literary genres in our bleakly utilitarian age, where in higher education everything must be relevant, applicable, reusable, economically beneficial. The very words speculation and speculative themselves have acquired malign resonances, of course, in the age of globalized crisis. Even the word creative has been co-opted by the neoliberal matrix, as when the new coinage, the creative university, turns out to be actually all about entrepreneurial innovation, forever subordinated to capitalist ends. This is why when Margaret Atwood dismisses a certain kind of science fiction as talking squids in outer space, I can't entirely share her disdain, much as we might admire and find much to explore in the allegorical and satirical strains of the speculative genre. Taking seriously an imagined engagement with a radical otherness, that is, the otherness of a universe with different rules and values as well as merely other species, strikes me as an uncompromising commitment to transcend the mundane that rather than attracting ridicule will come to seem both prescient and necessary in the unfathomable future that awaits our descendants. On behalf of the department, I therefore salute this exploration of what might one day be, or perhaps somewhere already is, and wish you the best of luck for an event that I hope is relevant and useful in mostly or even purely artistic, human, and dare I say spiritual terms. Welcome to you all, and thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, Dr. Craig. I'll now invite our coordinator, Dr. Nicola Hunt, to give the opening remarks.
Good morning to you. I feel slightly redundant coming after the head of our department, Dr. Craig. So I guess I want to speak about what impelled us to put on this symposium in the first place. And it had to do with several undergraduate students coming to me as their supervisor for their research paper and wanting to do something in science fiction or fantasy. And my first response was, we don't have the scholarly framework for that. You'll need to choose something more Caribbean-based. And then feeling a certain anxiety and unease immediately after I said it, right? And then one student persisted, a postgraduate student said, I want to do my thesis. on science fiction, and you're my supervisor. And I thought, you're going to need to find someone else. I don't feel comfortable doing this. But when we sat down and talked to my office, I began to realize this is what I had done was impose these kind of ridiculous categories and not realize that I had done it. So then when I started talking with my colleagues, specifically Dr. Providence, who is a huge speculative fiction fan. I mean, she's a wealth of information, so I'm talking you up, right, for your presentation, right? It came together that we have all this wealth of information in the Caribbean about science fiction, about fantasy, about horror, about gothic, about speculative fiction. But we didn't have a vocabulary to talk about it. We kept borrowing other people's terms. And we felt that coming after the post-colonial generation, we should be the ones coming up with our own vocabulary. So Dr. Providence sat down and wrote out the call for papers. And then she said, why don't we just send it out? And we sent it out. Said, well, who's gonna respond? We don't know. And then responses started coming in, and we're like, oh, there are people out there who want to do this. Okay. Let's go to our head, let's go and to our dean and say we want to put on a symposium. And they're like, sure, go ahead. And we're like, okay, let's do this. And then we have Dr. Karen Lord in Barbados, and we spoke to her, and she said, yeah, I would love to do something for this. And I'm like, okay, this is actually happening. We're actually doing this. So what we're a part of is this initiative to develop our own critical and theoretical framework for our own literature. And I don't want to make it sound secular, I mean, not secular, territorial, like we mark off a space and only we can intervene. We know that in the Caribbean, we are essentially metropolitan and global already. So our discussions are going to cover all sorts of literature from all sorts of the world, all parts of the world. But what we're interested in is what do our voices have to say about this literature? And you're a part of that process. Because what's going to come after this, I should let you know now, is that Dr. Providence has already approached the Journal of West Indian Literature to publish the proceedings from this conference. So we're going about the work of creating the intellectual, epistemological framework for the kind of stuff we love reading. Because at the foundation of it, we love science fiction. We love speculative fiction. And it's great that we get to talk about the kinds of things that we love. So that is my opening salvo for our symposium. I just want to thank you for being here and being a part of that.
Thank you so kindly, Dr. Hunt. There has been a lot of long nights, burning the candle at both ends, if that's, well, in the realm of spec fiction, that is possible, right? My task right now is to introduce our keynote speaker, and I'll start by saying quickly, Dr. Karen Lord is a Barbadian author, editor, and research consultant. Her debut novel, Redemption in Indigo, my favorite, won the 2008 Frank Collymore Literary Award, the 2010 Carl Brandon Parallax Award, the 2011 William L. Crawford Award, the 2011 Mytho-Poetic Fantasy Award for Adult Literature, and the 2012 Kitschi's Golden Tentacle Best Debut. So Dr. Karen Lord is a big deal, if I might say so myself, and was longlisted, and her work was longlisted for the 2011 Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature, nominated for the 2011 World Fantasy Award for Best Novel. Her second novel, The Best of All Possible Worlds, won the 2009 Frank Collymore Literary Award, the 2013 RT Book Reviewers Choice Award for Best Science Fiction Novel, and was a finalist for the 2014 Locus Awards. Its sequel, The Galaxy Game, was published in 2015, January. She's the editor of the 2016 anthology New Worlds, Old Ways, Speculative Tales from the Caribbean. She was a featured author for the 2018 Edinburgh International Book Festival, the Toastmistress for Worldcon 2017 in Finland, the 2015 Write-in Residence for the University of the West Indies St. Augustine Campus MFA program, the 2014 Guest of Honor at the, I am not going to butcher this word, ASON in Finland, and a feature author at the Adelaide Writers' Week 2013 in Australia, Calabash 2014, the Bocas. I think you're getting the picture. An extensive history of creating and being recognized for her talent. She has also been a judge for the 2012 James Tiptree Jr. Literary Award, the 2018 Codes Burt Award for Caribbean Young Adult Literature. In 2018, she became a member of the Frank Collymore Literary Endowment Committee, which judges the annual Frank Collymore Literary Award. She has participated as co-facilitator or instructor for writing and reading workshops at the Bocas Lit Fest, the BIM Lit Fest, Clarion West, yes, and the Edinburgh International Book Festival. She's a judge of the 2019 Commonwealth Short Story Prize and will be an instructor for the 2019 Clarion Workshop at the University of California in San Diego. Wow. Please join with me in welcoming Dr. Karen Lord as she delivers her keynote address.
Thank you so much, Dr. Providence. It's always a little terrifying to hear that, because I'm like, oh, this is why I'm so tired over the past decade or so. There has been a lot happening. It's been an interesting situation for me because as I stand here now, I do have to warn everybody that I have not got a literature background. So I'm not going to be able to frame things in the way that you expect. But I would like to think that, in a way, I've been working in the trenches of this industry, and that's what I hope to bring of what I have to say. And what I have to say syncs up so much with some of the comments that have already been made that I think that we're already very much on the same page as to what the future of this can be, and what your role in the future of this genre can be. So let's start with a question of how we define what Caribbean speculative fiction is. And of course, that depends on who's doing the defining, because readers, even discerning readers, are led by marketing to judge the book by its cover and design, and also by its location on the shelves of the bookstore and libraries. They're influenced by which reviewers and publications are covering it, covering the book. So you have this game that marketers play of, well, you know, this is X title meets Y title as if written by Z author, and that's supposed to tell you something. And in the worst cases, you end up with some kind of simplistic application of stereotype. I will call it stereotype, according to nationality or ethnicity. And I'm just going to briefly say that I'm not going to go into how I feel about the term magical realism and how non-academics tend to use it. But I do believe that academics, and more specifically the academics of our region, are our best hope for a definition made in full knowledge of our lived culture and our use of language, and most of all, a knowledge of the regional and diasporic literary canon with which the new Caribbean writings are engaging. So even though your job may be long and hard and at times tedious, I beg you to persevere. Keep writing your findings into the mainstream reviews so that the general public can read it. Change the conversation that has long been controlled by others. And believe me when I say that we're going to very happily direct our agents and publishers and publicists and editors to your articles when we're looking for support. And the truth is, maybe because we're too close to it, we authors sometimes are not very good at defining our own work. But on the other hand, we're brilliant at identifying what we like. We can look at our colleagues' writings their tools, their themes, and analyze how they relate to the present day and the society around us, both locally and globally. And we admire, we imitate, we relate. So in the course of doing this, I found 3 of my favorite recurring motifs in the genre of Caribbean speculative fiction. And I'm going to talk about them primarily using examples from 2 books by 2 authors of note. So, once more, my disclaimer, I'm an author, and yes, I'm an academic, but not in this field. So I beg you to ignore my lack of knowledge of the correct terms and theories and the foundational works that you are already naturally embedded in by virtue of your own experience, but instead accept this as coming from the heart of a writer enthralled by the craft, creating as if in a dream, reading with dual mind as both reader and creator, and interpreting the work kind of as a devotee divines the sacred text, which is to say, not objectively at all, but with love and respect and the occasional touch of awe. So let me first talk about Jamaican writer and sociologist Dr. Erna Brodber, who has won several awards, including the Order of Distinction, Commander Class from Jamaica, the D.Lit from UWI Mona, and the Musgrave Gold Medal for Literature and Orature from the Institute of Jamaica. In 2017, she was awarded a Wyndham Campbell Prize for her fiction, and as you all know, that's a chunk of money. We like prizes that are, chunks of money. Her novels include Jane and Louisa Will Soon Come Home, Mayal, which won the 1989 Commonwealth Book Prize for the Caribbean and Canada region, Louisiana, The Rainmaker's Mistake, and Nothing's Mad. The Rainmaker's Mistake, this is a story I actually covered with a book I covered with a friend of mine for a podcast. It's a story about origins, futures, freedoms, and hubris. The book opens with a surreal depiction of a quasi-magical plantation and then immediately shatters the illusion with a declaration of emancipation. Then we have the voices of 6 of the formerly enslaved telling the story. And they have unusually extended lifespans, so they experience their nation's changes from slavery to independence and beyond. And as the years approach the present day, there is yet more to discover in memories and evidence of a distant future, where their origins loop back to the past in a science-fictional time-traveling paradox. So that's Dr. Brodber. And Andre Alexis was born in Trinidad and grew up in Canada, and along with Dr. Brodber, he was awarded a Wyndham Campbell Prize as well in the fiction category in 2017. His debut novel, Childhood, won the Books in Canada First Novel Award and the Trillium Book Award, and was shortlisted for the Giller Prize and the Writers' Trust Fiction Prize. His other books include Pastoral, nominated for the Writers' Trust Fiction Prize, Asylum, Beauty and Sadness, Ingrid and the Wolf, and The Hidden Keys. His novel 15 Dogs won the 2015 Scotiabank Giller Prize and the Rogers Writers' Trust Fiction Prize. 15 Dogs is the second book in the Quincunx, a 5-book series in progress, which Alexis describes as a prolonged invitation to think about place, love, power, and the nature of the divine. Pastoral is book 1, and The Hidden Keys is book 4. And no, I'm not making an error here, because Alexis is writing book 5 next and book 3 last. So that 3rd book is actually the central pin of the Quincunx. 15 Dogs begins with 2 Greek gods drinking in a Canadian bar, as you do. They make a wager, as bored immortals are often wont to do. They give human-level intelligence to 15 dogs they find overnighting in a veterinary clinic and set them free to discover if any of them will end up happier than humans before they die. The adventures and fates of the 15, of course, are as much a commentary on the human condition as on the canine, with more than a hint of speculation on the divine condition as well. Now, these 2 authors are listed on, everybody take a note, CaribbeanSF.com. And I'm going to speak very briefly about that site. That is the brainchild and creation of Tobias Buckell. Is there anybody in this room who's met Tobias? Nobody? Nobody has encountered Tobias Buckell in person? Anybody who at least has encountered his books? Okay. I'm just going to mention that when we talk about reviewers, Tobias's books are reviewed by people outside of the region as being what you would call very basic sci-fi, the genre, you know, your thriller kind of aspect, your explosions, your space opera, etc. He is always thrilled when he gets a review from someone like Shivani Ramlokan or Lisa Allen Agostini, because they are able to pick out the layers. They're able to see what outside reviewers cannot see. And suddenly his book turns from being just commercial, yes, successful, yes, but just commercial, to literary. That's all it takes, a different layer of understanding, a different understanding of the background that we're coming from. So that's the kind of alchemy that can happen, and that's kind of what we're asking of you. So he had this vision, and Nalo Hopkinson and I have contributed a little bit to it, but it's really his design, and he's the main administrator. And he decided to soft launch it rather than wait for perfection. And perfection still eludes us because we're busy writing. We're busy creating the content that you guys will do your research on. So this is actually just us sort of building it and hoping others will come and kind of take over. But you know, I encourage you to visit that site, look at the possibilities. We're literally got areas that can be built on. And contribute if you can by expanding the bibliography, sharing news, whatever you would like to do. The bibliography already includes translations, and we would look forward to seeing works in other Caribbean languages also listed. So we classified The Rainmaker's Mistake and 15 Dogs. Oh, sorry, I should have mentioned the most important point. We make sure that buy links are connected to all of the books. So the person sees the book and immediately goes, oh, where can I get that? Click. And take you right where you need to go. Whether it's an audiobook, an ebook, all those things we have linked up there, because writers have to eat. So we classified these two books as speculative fiction because Talking Dogs, Extended Lifespans, Nonlinear Time, and The Intervention of the Gods, they kind of all deserve to be labeled as speculative, and I hope you agree with me. But I'm going to focus on three aspects in particular. Two that I think are common to the speculative genre, and one that I believe is foundational to all literatures. And these aspects have struck me about these books because I think that they exemplify a style and approach that is particularly Caribbean when we compare Caribbean speculative fiction to the wider genre speculative fiction. So the first aspect is what I call the reframing of the quotidian as myth, the everyday as myth. So Broadburn, in Rainmaker's Mistake, she begins with a plantation origin myth. That's false. It's completely, it can't happen, but it's still significant to the final understanding of the truth. She continues the book more realistically, almost historically, except, of course, you have these semi-immortal protagonists with the long lifespan seeing several generations of change. But then finally she concludes with a monologue that's part poetry, part prophecy, that also tells the truth about the past in a way that can be understood and accepted. And also it kind of supplants that past colonial myth for good. And then we have, of course, Alexis using Apollo and Hermes from the Greek pantheon as a cause of the new intelligence, the chosen dogs. And these gods are, of course, from our old West Indian curriculum of classics, the same curriculum that helped to inspire Walcott's Omeros and other standards of our canon. So the Greek gods, their characteristic capriciousness is surreal, it's humorous, but it's terrifying because they upend human and canine lives just for the sake of a bet. And, to underscore the unpredictability, the fates also appear, and they make a devastating choice that turns the story in a tragic direction. So there are two realities running parallel. The denizens of a modern, mundane Toronto, who are generally unaware they're being manipulated by the gods, and the gods lightheartedly meddling in the outcomes of the real world with only occasional consideration for the long-term consequences for mortals. So you see, in these two books here, myth is being used to illuminate or to emphasize reality, or to heighten the significance of a character or action. But what I've also found fascinating is that myth also functions as warped or changed memory. It's a filter to keep terrible realities at a blurred distance when they can't be confronted directly. Myth can help us handle trauma when our everyday experience is a horror story. And we live in a region of historical horrors, and we're constantly facing disasters of climate and geology and economy. And seriously, when I tell non-Caribbean colleagues about the Andrew Salkey books that I enjoyed as a child, they're kind of slightly horrified because, drought, hurricane, riot, earthquake, what does that say about our kind of childhood expectations? But this is how the Caribbean writer is at home with the mythopoeic approach, whether it's newly created fable or reimagined traditional folklore. Just to branch off a little from my main examples, another example is Jamaica Kincaid's See Now Then. Now, in an interview, she described her characters as mythic, not flesh and blood. The children of the family are named Heracles and Persephone, Greek classics again, and even everyday actions are given very magical touches. To go further back in the past, she has a short story called Ovando. It's a fantasy horror depiction of a zombie conquistador. And this is a character who can be read as a historical Nicholas de Ovando, who was the first governor of the West Indies. Or it can be read as a symbol of the corpse-rotten, failed god of colonialism. So what Kincaid later says about See Now Then, I think her words apply to so much of Caribbean literature. She says, the book operates on two levels, with a sort of reality and then a sort of interpretation. Some years ago, Locus Magazine recorded me and Nala Hopkinson in conversation for a podcast. And one of the things we discussed was how the old folk tales of Rolling Calf and Dwen and Baku were very much likely inspired by the real world terrors of that time. And we were both in the process of kind of writing reimagined folk tales ourselves. And one of the things I thought about is that as authors, we kind of have to keep this in mind when we're doing that kind of story, because we have to see where the past terror that is represented by that myth touches our present fears in order to keep it relevant to the reader. So, in summary, there's both joy and sorrow in our ability to make myth out of our lives. Because, yes, we come from a place of trauma with many things past and present that still catch in our throats if we dare to express them straightforwardly. But we also move towards a future of eternity and legend, turning the mundane soap opera and petty drama of life into an epic worthy of posterity by operating on two levels, elevating the grand with the small and making ourselves heroic. So the second thing that I noticed and appreciated so much is a non-linear or non-human view of time. So Broadbent, in her work, she takes the reader from the past to the present and then to a memory of the future, where it appears that future choices have influenced past events as much as present choices will influence future events. So she's playing with cause and effect in a way that kind of satisfies physics equations, because time can run in both directions for the equations, but it confounds the human concept of the one-way arrow of time. And Alexis compares the canine sense of time pre- and post-awakening to that higher intelligence. He describes a dog whose owners go to work and they leave her alone, and this is something they've always done. But when the intelligence comes, there's this torturous deepening and expansion of these solitary hours that it works so terribly on the newly awakened, newly intelligent mind that the result is catatonia. So this new time sense also gives the dogs the awareness of death. And as the immortal gods do not have that awareness themselves, it's with a kind of cruel curiosity that they observe the dogs to see how it affects them. So, this reimagining time, I know it's a staple of the wider speculative genre, but there's a particular style of it in Caribbean literature that suggests not only an interest in paradoxes, but a heightened understanding of the interconnectedness of now and then and not yet. And I'm going to go back to Kincaid again and to See Now Then, because she describes that novel as non-chronological. And then she also goes further and centers time itself as a character that acts on the lives of other characters. So here are the two interview quotes I want to share with you. It's not a book in the usual way of and then, and next. It doesn't have what you'd call a traditional structure or a traditional narrative. But it's very structured. It's very mannered, actually, in the way your mind might work. I mean, I've come to think that the traditional way of writing is the artificial way, and that's not the way things work at all. It's not the way thinking works. I really identified with that statement. And she continues later on, time is the main character. Time is the element that controls the consciousness, the very being of people. I started out thinking, what is this thing we call time? And it started in this way. Every day I see a photograph of myself taken when I was 2 years of age. And I would look at it and wonder, well, what happened to that 2-year-old? Where did it go? And so it's from that really that I began to contemplate all of the things that had happened. And even Wilson Harris, oh goodness, so hard to read. I tried. I still have Panels to the Peacock open. I really do. I'm going to get to it, okay? But even Wilson Harris said of his own work, my writing is quantum writing. Do you know of the quantum bullet? The quantum bullet, when it's fired, leaves not one hole, but two. That's how my writing is. That's a kind of a not quite clear understanding of the physics of it, but I get what he's saying, because we're talking about the multiple probabilities, as it were, and how that can be wrapped up into narrative. Now, I sometimes have thought of my first book, Redemption in Indigo, as fractal or spiral, anything but the traditional dramatic arc with its single line rise and fall. Now, it was comforting for me to discover that this isn't necessarily a flaw or an affectation, but it's a subconscious following in the footsteps of several Caribbean writers before me. A story may not have a conclusion, that sort of signal end that allows the reader to close the book and put it down. It may instead have a resonance, a connectedness that traces from beginning to end and back again. So that demands multiple readings for the full effect to take place. So a story is thus renewed at every sitting, fresh at every pass. So for the sequel to Redemption in Indigo, I went even deeper into this tangled view of time and cause and effect, and my God, it almost killed me, experimenting with both nonlinear time and the power of choice and witness to determine events in the present, in the past, in the future. The sequel, which is going to be published, I get to do this, I get to promote myself. The sequel, which will be published in summer next year, is called Unraveling, and I'll be reading a bit from the manuscript this evening. That's positive, yay. Okay, so the third and final aspect, and this is the one that I think is sort of foundational to all literature, is a playfulness of language. And in the first chapter of 15 Dogs, Alexis, I think, gives us the writer's paradox. And here's his character speaking. Human languages are too vague, said Apollo. That may be, said Hermes, but it makes humans more amusing. Just listen to these people. You'd swear they understood each other, though not one of them has any idea what their words actually mean to another. How can you resist such farce? So writers know that they work with limited tools, and so we also work with the limitations of our tools. The limitations of language become for Broadburn and Alexis the playground of language. The sound and cadence of Rodber's prose is firmly cited in the oral tradition, with a range of subtlety and variation from poetic fable to standard narrative to dramatic monologue. Words do not always speak truly, both to and for the protagonists, and a truth may be more closely approximated via symbolism than realism. Alexis, he does something really interesting. He comments on the foundations of language by showing the evolution of the 15 dogs as they communicate among themselves and with others. One dog, called Prince, teaches the pack to speak their own distinct canine language, a language which is incomprehensible to ordinary dogs and humans alike. So in addition to making up new words and expanding their vocabulary, Prince also creates and recites poems. Andre Alexis and Kim Maltman are who wrote and co-wrote these poems for the book. And they did it in a format invented by Francois Carodec. I think I pronounced that right. A format which is intended to be appreciated by both dogs and humans. Each poem contains the sound of the dog's name, although the name itself may not be spelled out. So here's an example using the poet's own name, Prince. Longing to be sprayed, the green snake writhing in his master's hand. Back and forth into that stream, jump, rinse, a coat slick with soap. So, dog hears its name, it's going to have the ears perk up. So that's how you know the poem is dog is appreciating the poem. So it's fitting, I think, that Prince, this poet of the dog pack, and also the last of the 15 to face death, sorry, spoiler, is the one who wins the wager for Hermes by being the only one of the dogs to die happy. And in the final minutes of his life, he is cheered and uplifted by remembering the sound of one of his poems. In it, he hears the beauty of the language he invented, and he feels reassured that it will not remain extinct, but could potentially be recreated in the future. Alexis thus centers the importance of poetry, that it can push the boundaries of understanding, show the beauty of language for the beauty's sake, stir up the emotions, which are also a path to communication, although a bit less precise, and give meaning to life. So that's a writer's love letter to the imperfect tools of the craft, embedded in a book about talking dogs. Alexis honors language in other ways. He's asked about his earliest influences in an interview, and he replied, Trinidad. The way Trinidadians speak, the rhythms of storytelling, the repetitions, the simplicity of language. It isn't that I necessarily write so that a reader can see or hear these things in my work, but they're where I start from. Caribbean writers love to slip in some kind of homage to our mother tongue, our heart's language, whether it's a stray word or phrase, lighting up a block of standard English, or something more complex. And the example I think of is Nalo Hopkinson's gloriously imagined evolution of a future West Indian dialect on a distant planet in her novel Midnight Robber. Now, many of our works have to be listened to, not read, to be fully appreciated and better understood. Goodness, if you ever have a look at, Goodreads is only as good as Goodreads can be. But if you have a look at the Goodreads reviews of See, Now, Then, the marked difference between those who read it and those who listened to the audiobook, where Kincaid actually narrates, it's like 4 stars over here, 1 star over here. Very striking. Anyway, the spoken voice is key to our communication. We push the boundaries of language by refusing linearity and rules, just as we bend the rules and linearity of time to push the boundaries of narrative. So I warned you earlier that I'm not an academic in literatures. My field is, in fact, sociology. So what may be obvious to you was a discovery for me. I have read widely, and I continue to try to do so. But when I started off, I didn't have that depth and focus on the Caribbean literary canon when I started writing my own stories. So when writers speak of finding your voice, that's an interesting thing. It's an interesting experience to fall into what feels like a natural way of telling a story, and then realizing that there are actually very few published examples of it in what you think, what you're told is your genre, which is to say, the wider and largely Western genre of science fiction and fantasy. So for me, finding similar styles and themes in other Caribbean works was deeply reassuring, even though that discovery came relatively late in my writing career. The impulse to tell a story in a peculiar, particular way was no longer a personal quirk, but a deep cultural imperative already expressed by far more accomplished and established writers. Additionally, it was fascinating to me from a sociological point of view because this genre builds imaginary worlds to explain the real world. And the preoccupations and stylings of our Caribbean literature are a way of understanding home. So this is another manifestation of our cultural DNA. And I want to ensure that it's not softened or erased by influences outside the region. So I'm looking forward to getting even more reassurance from the proceedings of the symposium. I've been looking at the abstracts, and I see you're assessing the old guard and the new, including a lot of my favorites. I'm thrilled to see authors writing in languages other than English, and I am incredibly pleased to see the attention that's being given to the emerging writers from the anthology New World's Old Ways. Can I again make an appeal to you to send information about your work to CaribbeanSF.com so that these writers can discover the research that they're inspiring? This is important. Tell us what we are writing. Tell us who we are. We may think that we know, but it helps to have a second opinion. And when you've done that, tell the world of publishing so they'll have a better idea where to shelve us and how to promote us. Tell the agents so they will not overlook the manuscripts of our new writers, mistaking difference for incompetence. Tell the editors so they'll stop trying to squeeze our fractal pegs into geometric holes. Tell the reviewers, especially those who really wanted to like that book, but never realized that they were critiquing jazz improv according to the norms of balladry. Tell the readers who are looking for literature that pushes the boundaries of what can be told with story and history and futuristic vision. Let them know that treasures sit on their doorstep, written by names that are sometimes better known abroad than at home. After all, a genre is only a construct, an artificial domain that you determine by setting the criteria as you see fit. Perhaps we should follow the example of our own literature and simply admit that the speculative permeates our literature and our lives in such mingling, tangling quantities that the most we can do is point to it. We cannot separate it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lord. Please join with me in giving Dr. Lord another round of applause. For such powerful words at such a significant moment in our literary history. I neglected to mention, but I think that it should be understood that this is the first symposium of this kind to be hosted by any institution in the University of the West Indies family of institutions. So it's a big deal, in other words, so we should give ourselves another round of applause. Okay, so several things leapt out to me, but before I get into that, while you are sort of digesting what you would have heard, there's going to be a brief question and answer session to be followed by a break and we will then journey up to the Bruce St. John where the bulk of the panels, where most of the panels will be held. So just briefly, the things that leapt out to me, this idea of folktales being inspired by the terrors of the time, the importance of knowledge production from the region, the importance of having our voices heard in critiquing the output from our institutions, from our writers, and bringing a particular understanding or another layer of understanding to the material that our writers from our region are producing. So give yourselves a round of applause. And Dr. Hunt would lead the way to the Bruce St. John conference room.